whoever goes will experience the overview effect constantly, not briefly. It'll just be part of their awareness that they, let's say, live on the moon. So that takes for granted what we're struggling to understand here. My question came from a panel that occurred right after the Challenger accident. And that was 1986. And we were shocked that, oh, the astronauts actually can die. We thought this was routine. It was silly to think it was routine, but that's kind of what we had lulled ourselves into believing. And George Will asked that question, have we been using rather banal reasons for space exploration, like non-stick frying pans? And Tom Wolfe said, you're right. Our country has never had a philosophy of space exploration. And that's what started me on the whole space philosophy journey. And it's still a journey, Bella. I don't know the answer, but what I'm asking myself is, why is it that evolution has brought humanity to the point where we are in fact able to experience the overview effect? It didn't have to happen. 99% of all species that have ever existed on this planet, they're gone. They're extinct. We're still here. And we're able to leave. So can we ask ourselves, what can we give? What is our contribution to the universe? I believe it's a really important question. And my tentative answer is that we are part of the universe. We're part of the earth. As we evolve and become more intelligent, self-aware, and conscious, the universe evolves, becomes more self-aware and conscious. So I think that's the answer. Now, a lot of people are never, ever going to look at it that way. They're going to look at, can I make a non-stick frying pan out of this in some way? Or can I sell that blue? Of course, that's a human thing to do, but it's a question of, can we balance exploration and exploitation and not constantly see it from the human point of view? And I would really like to open that question to a lot of people, because I don't feel that I have a final answer yet.
I remember in that same interview back then, you raised something that made me think a lot about that, because you said, what is not just a benefit for humans to experience the overview effect, but how can the universe benefit from us having that experience? And I think that is an interesting perspective. That's exactly this perspective that the overview effect invites us to take on. And maybe there is no answer yet. We're just at the beginning, right? Eiman, you've been the 704th person to go to space. That's a great opportunity to ask you directly, can you take us with you on this journey on space? Take us with you on the launch pad. How was it to enter the vehicle, experience a countdown? After years of operation, you were sitting there and then you went to space over the Kármán line. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been pursuing this for over 20 years. I applied to NASA 5 times. I was a finalist twice, but didn't get picked. So it was like close, but unachievable. And then I felt, if you'd asked me in like 2015, I would have said, well, it may not happen. But then in 2021, when the world of commercial spaceflight opened up, which allowed Ron Rosado and myself to go to space with different companies, it was an aha moment. Like, okay, this is more accessible. And now there will be opportunities for people like myself or Isabel or Frank to go to space, which is pretty incredible. So, you know, as I was sitting there, I'd been thinking about this for so long, particularly sitting on top of a rocket. And I was all at peace, but also very, very excited, like a kid waking up on Christmas morning, just excited to get up there. And when that rocket took off, you can feel the force beneath you, but it's still quite a smooth ride as you're going up, and you're just seeing the earth getting further, the ground getting further and further away from you, and watching the altimeter and saying, okay, this is as high international airplane flight. Okay, this is what they're trying to do space balloons at. Oh, wow, we are way up. And at some point, all of a sudden, there's a transition from when you're within the atmosphere to where it is very clear that you are not. And it's that blackness that Frank is speaking of, which I think in a lot of ways was more profound to me. And maybe when you listen to someone like Jim Lovell, who recently passed away, and he says, I took my thumb and the earth was everything humanity had ever known, all our sun, all our knowledge was behind my thumb. I think part of the amazing part of that is also because everything else was black. I mean, I think the expansiveness of space was one of those things that was mind-blowing, even though you know it, right? We learned as children, the universe is expanding, and to get from here to Mars is very difficult. And then to get out of our solar system is incredibly difficult. Those distances are very mind-blowing to humans because we don't traverse that here on Earth. And to see how utterly black and how deep space, pretty wild, even more so than just looking at Earth. And so I wonder, as humans do expand, and I hope within our lifetime we have a station on the moon, maybe even Mars, but as we do go out, is it going to be a feeling of longing for Earth, or is it going to be a feeling of otherness? Like, oh, those people are so far away. Like, that's not the same. That's not the same as us. And if I think of like Vikings, Vikings for a very long time didn't really where they were, but then they developed the tools to go out further and further, even coming all the way to the Americas, right? How did they feel? What was that experience? And we know that as they interacted with other cultures, that they changed. And so how will we change? Is we don't know if there's any other living forms out there, but as we experience different, environments and different types of lands and planets and other things, it'll be interesting. But yeah, it was incredible. Floating around was fun too.
Yeah, I imagine it's a super interesting question, but you just brought up how humanity changes once we become multiplanetary and how that affects our development. And that's why I think it's so important right now to think about space exploration, because our mindset is what we export from this planet. Right now, we are creating the seeds for this multiplanetary species. And the perspective we come from is also what we start with into the space. We can't control how humanity will look like in 1,000 years, but sure is right now, as you said, it's becoming more and more common to go to space. And eventually there will be stations and there will be some kind of civilizations, and the way we see life and the way we see the role of a human in the universe will kind of influence how we may develop. So that's incredible. I'm also happy to read people in the chat. If you have questions already or ideas, feel free to share your ideas. In the meanwhile, when you take us with you in this experience, do you remember looking out of the window? What did you see? What did you smell? What did you feel like? What were your thoughts? As much as you can recall the present moment back then.
Well, I mean, I would say it was a time warp because it was a suborbital flight. So a very short time in space in a matter of minutes. But it also felt extremely long. When you first get weightless and you unbuckle your seatbelt, I didn't know what to expect, but all of a sudden here you are just moving up effortlessly. And it's not like scuba diving. Because scuba diving, there's still a level of resistance against the water. This was much more free. And also in scuba diving, you're wearing this mask and breathing. And it was just much more comfortable, much more liberating. And then looking out the window and seeing the curvature of the Earth was an incredible experience, because I think we've seen a lot of videos and pictures of the Earth now from space, but to see it with your own eyes and just to see how bright and vivid those colors were quite incredible. I don't think video screens do it justice, because it'd be like, I don't know what the equivalent is in Europe. I know you're looking at it, but here in the United States, it's the Grand Canyon. It's beautiful, massive. Okay, it's like if you see that with your eyes, versus if you see a picture of it, and space is the same, right? It's if you see it with your eyes versus if you see it with a picture. I think Frank has that in books from one of the astronauts. I forget which astronaut did that interview. I have Frank's book over here too. I'm about halfway through it.
Yeah, it was Michael Lopez Alegria who said that. That's exactly what he said, was that he was familiar with what he would see. We have seen a lot of pictures of the Earth now. Early astronauts really didn't even have that to go by. But he said, suddenly knowing you're there, you're seeing it with your own eyes. You're not looking at a picture, and is what makes it unique. And I do think weightlessness is a big part of the overview effect, because we know that zero gravity affects every organ of the body. And the brain is an organ of the body. So astronauts talk about, I've never seen a blue like that. I've never seen a green like that. Well, what's that about? Of course, part of it is you're at a distance, you're looking through, well, you're not in the atmosphere anymore. But I think weightlessness heightens the perception. And Eiman's a physician, he might have something to say about that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's probably the total psychological shift, right? Because it's not like in VR where you can get immersed into a world, but you're also physically immersed in that world. So you are somewhere where you're not supposed to be. Well, but you're not created to be or developed to be in this environment. The other thing I'd say, speaking to that, was, the Blue Origin New Shepard capsule rotates. So every window gets a view, as it goes through. But I was back in my seat and the sun hit me, and it was much more of an incredible sensation. It was probably I was above the atmosphere, and so sensation may have been different then, but also just knowing like, whoa, like I'm in space. That's the sun. There's a lot less between me and the sun right now, which was pretty incredible and a moving kind of part of the experience.
In the overview video you mentioned, Jeff Hoffman, a 5-time shuttle astronaut, said, you see the sun as a star. Now that sounds very straightforward, but it is a star, and you really can realize that when you're out there. It's hard to realize it when you're on the surface.
Yeah, maybe like the perception of the sun is all interesting, because we usually speak about the Earth mainly, right? But you get a visual perspective on both. You're less protected of the sun, but also you get a different intensity of it.
I wanted to comment too, if we have time, about this question of what happens as we go farther away, because I came to understand when I first wrote the book, when you're in orbit, okay, you see the Earth, and that's the overview effect. And arguably, when you're on the moon and you look back, that's quite different, because it's not 240 miles away, it's 240,000 miles away, but it's recognizably the Earth, right? Continents, oceans, and so on. When you go to Mars, it's not going to be that way for the most part. You're going to see the Earth as a point of light, mostly in the sky. And I call that the Copernican perspective, which was more of an awareness of being part of the solar system. And the question of what will it do in terms of our feelings about the Earth, I don't know. But by analogy, when my father was in the Army, we moved to Germany. And we lived on a military base of 25,000 Americans. And it was like a space station, because we were separate from Germany. We had 25,000 Americans, really all the comforts of home, most of them anyway. And the young people had a mystical view of the United States. That's where everything was great. That was where you could get everything you wanted. If you couldn't get a food you wanted in Germany, you could get it when you went back to the States. There could be an us and them approach.
I think that really leads us back to the mindset, right? The buyers we have right now, and what of those we take with us, which of those are so deep inside of us that we have like the same us versus them mindset in space, or if we have a different state of consciousness that actually sees us as one multiplanetary species where you're just a part of this. I think that is super fascinating, and only future can tell us. But to get a glimpse of it right now, like from Eiman, from your perspective, did it change anything in the way you see life or the Earth, or did it more or less stay the same? Did it have any effect on how you see life or your role in the universe, or is it exactly as before that day?
I mean, I think I am more filled with gratitude, understanding that I was given the opportunity to do something which still not a lot of humans have done in the history of humankind. I think less than 800 probably still humans have gone to space at this point. And so I try to bring that energy of gratitude here forward. And so when people talk to me or ask me about space, I'm always happy to discuss it because I feel like I should be the spokesperson as somebody who's been privileged to be able to go to space. And so, when someone like you offers me the opportunity to come here, I appreciate it. Try to come if I can. Beyond that, I'd like to tell you maybe more patience, but there are times I'm definitely not patient. But in general, I'm probably more relaxed. And, I enjoy seeing things and looking out the window and trying to spend some time in nature. But I like that stuff before, so I don't think there's like a fundamental shift in who I was in that sense. I do think it allows me to connect more with people just because it's such a wild thing to be able to go up there and be like, wow, like we really do exist in this bubble, and the bubble is quite thin. Very easy to go from here to there. Not easy, but it feels effortless when you're sitting in a rocket deciding to do it.
Yeah, and of course, you're right. Not many people have had this experience yet, and also still in such a short amount of time, right? The most people who go with Blue Origin or Virgin at some point, it's a very short period of time until we have stations or anything like that for commercial people. I remember, Frank, you have been also talking about other ways of experiencing this, maybe not the same experience, but I mean, any experience is always subjective, right? So no astronaut also had the same experience because it's so subjective. I remember you talked about having such an experience kind of like in a plane, for instance. Or we talked about Zen Buddhism that gets you in a different state of mind, right? Where you are feeling this interconnectedness and you can even in visualization imagine Earth from space. What are ways that people can experience this in just their own unique way?
It's a very good question, and it's important because I think on the one hand, the overview effect as described is incredibly special and unique, and I don't want to denigrate that. On the other hand, there are variations or analogs to it that I want people who live on Earth to know. And in my book, I talk about becoming a Terranaut, which is having the consciousness of interconnection and acting on it without necessarily flying off the planet. So to start with, the concept, the idea of the overview effect did start on an airplane when I was working with the Space Studies Institute back in the 1980s. And my mentor was Gerard K. O'Neill, who had an idea of large-scale space migration, large numbers of people living off of the Earth. And I was staring out the window and thinking about what would it be like to live off the Earth permanently? And I was looking down at the planet. I saw the connections. I saw the relationships. I saw there were no borders or boundaries. And it hit me. I would always have an overview of the Earth if I lived off world. Oh, I would experience the overview effect. And so it started that way. And I think it's useful to make a distinction between the overview and the effect. The overview is that view of the planet from a distance. The effect, from the very beginning, I saw it as similar to what meditation produces, what Zen Buddhism talks about, enlightenment, spiritual realizations of unity and oneness. Because interconnectedness, unity, oneness, which is all part of the overview effect, that's part of every spiritual practice or tradition. So definitely, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention two things. One is that virtual reality is a powerful medium, and a number of people are working on recreating the overview effect with virtual reality. And I recently experienced a video, I believe it was made by Felix and Paul of Montreal. And it was astronauts working outside of the International Space Station. It was actually filmed by astronauts. So it was not a simulation, it was the real thing. And there were two people with me who were both astronauts, incidentally commercial astronauts. I said, "Oh, this is what you guys have been telling me. Oh, I see it. I see it. Yeah, I get it. I get it. It's really cool." And that was virtual reality. I mean, it wasn't the real thing. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you is a little bit expansive, but if it's real, my team and I have been considering, could an artificial intelligence experience the overview effect? So we're working on that. I don't have too much to say about actually how it might be done, but I had a dialogue with GPT-5, formerly Chat. We had a long chat about, could you experience the overview effect? And GPT-5 said, well, it's a visual phenomenon and I don't have eyes. It's an emotional phenomenon. I don't have feelings. But it's an intriguing question. Let's talk about it some more. And to make a really long story short, I think GPT-5 came up with a way to experience the overview effect as an artificial intelligence, not the way a human would, but as an AI would. And maybe we can take it further. Anyway, it's an AI can experience that I think a person can. And a lot of it really just has to do with being aware of the incredible beauty and, just the incredible wonder of what's right here on Earth. This is the best planet. Jeff Bezos says it. Anybody who's ever left the Earth knows this is the best planet. So a lot of what the overview effect is about is awe and wonder, and you can have awe and wonder right here at home.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I have one last question for both of you before I want to open the questions for audiences as well, if anyone wants to drop their questions. Because I'm fascinated by this effect, of course, myself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be hosting this event, I guess. And I have experienced it in several ways. I also tried the VR experience. The DLR, the German aerospace agency, has a bus that they bring to space conferences. And if you're there, you can go in the seat and experience it. And it's very nice. And it's VR, so it's limited in that way. I find the meditation ways are way more interesting. And there's also one meditation called the 6-phase meditation by Mind Valley by Vishen Lakhiani. There you actually visualize Earth from space and you try to see that and you feel that. And every time I'm on a plane or scuba diving or just walking in nature, I try to imagine how rare this is, that no one else, we have those forests and stuff. And then you can get a sense of the emotional experience in a way. And I personally think it adds, every time you get to this point that you feel emotionally that connected, it adds some wonder at all, what you just mentioned, to your life. And how wouldn't you live your life any better if you wouldn't be appreciating what you here have right now, right? So that leads to the last question that I have for you both. What do you think is a benefit for humanity of experiencing this? What can we learn as a species with the problems we have today? How can the overview effect be of service for not just humanity, but the universe, as you said?
Well, I mean, I think spaceflight, human spaceflight has shown that with peoples like the United States and Russia working together even during the era of the Cold War, that when you get to space, you really have to rely on each other and hopefully not be adversarial like it is on Earth, right? Our desire to take resources from one person to another leads to a lot of probably suffering that we have as humans. So if you have a limited number of humans in space, I'd like to think we would find a way to work together, though there are plenty of sci-fi stories that are the opposite. We're still cheating, killing, and stealing from each other for each other's resources. I do think that kind of cooperation is important. So I think as we head to the moon, the Artemis Accord and those kinds of documents that are being made to hopefully be able to share the moon becomes important, because as China may beat us to the moon, beat the United States to the moon, maybe not, but there are going to be people backed by nations going there. And so when we get there, what happens? How is this divvied up? Is it going to be the same nonsense that happens here on Earth, or is it going to be different? I do think it's important for people to have these experiences, because I think any experience that allows people to think outside of themselves is valuable, because then you can start thinking about others. While people on this call may be altruistic or thinking beyond themselves, I do think that a large portion of humanity still is stuck on the I and the what can I do to make my life better, and not necessarily what can I do to improve humanity.
Yeah, thank you very much. That would be amazing if that would be a step towards more the unity consciousness that helps us to recognize that we are all on this tiny spaceship together. Thank you. And Frank, do you have any thoughts to add on this question?
Yeah, just briefly, I'd like to agree with you, but there are many, many benefits of space exploration, but I do believe the biggest benefit would be what my nonprofit, the Human Space Program, is working on, which is to bring the overview effect down to Earth, to bring this awareness that the astronauts have down to the planet, to eventually change the way we do things here. You know, every behavior starts with an idea or a philosophy. The way we are behaving on planet Earth is contradictory to the truth. That's one of the key aspects of the overview effect, is that shows us the truth of our situation. This fact that we're on a spaceship in a limitless sea, and we need to count on each other and work with each other to survive. Our survival is at stake. As we leave the planet, we do have a choice. We can take those old biases and prejudices with us, or a new way of thinking. Many people don't know this, but when President Kennedy launched Apollo, he did not want it to be a space race. He wanted it to be a cooperative effort of the United States and the Soviet Union and other countries. That was a long time ago. He already had that insight. It just takes leadership. We could have cooperative space ventures today if we had that kind of leadership. So we're able to transcend these ways of thinking, and it really just takes new voices, new ideas, and new initiatives. So I'm very hopeful, and I think we can do it. And it's thanks to people like Eiman and Ron, who's here. And I do want to close by saying, as I've always said before, I'm not the hero of the overview effect, it's the astronauts. They're the ones who go out there and have the experience and bring it back, and they don't keep it to themselves. They share it with us. So my hat is off to the astronauts.
Thank you very much for both of your contributions. Now we have a few minutes left. And of course, if anyone has anything to add, a question they want to raise, feel free to raise your hand and ask anything that we maybe didn't cover or should still.
Rocio put in a question regarding analogs as an alternative to raise society's awareness. There are places doing this. I know, for instance, STAM at Biosphere 2, and their whole premise is to try to make this as high fidelity as possible. So offering these analogs, you're resource poor. So, you know, you have the water you have the food you have, and you have to utilize that in a way to get you through your time frame of the analog, whether it's 3 days, 5 days, 2 weeks. And so in that sense, I think it gives us an awareness, at least, of how to utilize those resources. And then for sure, from like a neuropsychology standpoint, analogs are a good way to test human behavior in these settings. And I was talking to someone earlier today about, you know, Russia and the United States, and I think ESA have done lots of these analogs that are long, like months, 6 months. I think one was like a year.
And I think these are the folks who are really getting ready for large-scale space settlement, because that's going to be the big challenge on the moon, on Mars, in an O'Neill community. It's going to be the same challenge we have right here, which is getting along with each other.
Thank you very much. If there's any other questions, still feel free to ask it. I also just dropped the link to our weight loss for memberships that we do future events and so on. As I couldn't share my slides earlier, you can find it now in the chat. Of course, if there's any questions, feel free to raise them. Otherwise, I hope you had everything covered so far. As a last takeaway, is there anything you guys have as a last message you want to share with people? Is there anything that can follow your work with this human spaceflight program, or also what you're doing, Eiman, something that you want to share with people?
From my standpoint, if you have a dream, just keep persisting and take small steps, meet people, take the effort, leave no stone unturned, and you don't know where you'll end up in 10, 15, or 20 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Eiman, I don't know what's wrong with NASA that they haven't chosen you to be that, but I do know from interviews, I've interviewed NASA astronauts who they applied 8 times, 6 times. I mean, it's standard, but you can apply that to anything in life. You have a passion. Just don't give up on it. Just keep pursuing it. And who knows, you might come up with something that's really revolutionary. You never know. I've said this to many people. When I wrote the Overview Effect, I had no credentials to do that. I didn't have a PhD. I hadn't been into outer space. I wasn't an astronaut. I just had an experience and I had to do it. I had no choice in the matter. So I'm sure there are people at this event who might have something similar. And it's persistence that really pays off in the long term. Your dream is as valid as anyone else's dream. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
I think both of you are a great example of exactly that, applying multiple times to finally go to space, preparing 20 years. Also, from Frank's perspective, I listened also to some of your biography, finding your way to become a space philosopher, which is also something that didn't exist. So sometimes it's not just persistence, but also some kind of creativity of becoming something that didn't exist before. That's truly inspiring. So thank you both for your work and for your persistence. That's wonderful. There's one hand I can see.
Yeah.
Feel free to ask a question before we close the event.
My name is Aurobi. I'm working with space philosopher also for my research. So that settlement on Mars or beyond solar system, that type of civilization. So what should be our ethics of space migration?
Rovi she's an example of someone who has persisted. I'm here from India, and she's working on her PhD on the overview effect of the cosmos hypothesis. I believe she interviewed you, Eiman. Yeah, I'm correct.
I didn't take the Zoom interview yet because Eiman is very busy. So initial thoughts I collected, I'll do interpretation, I'll send back whether I'm interpreting properly or not.
We can talk after, yes.
Yeah.
I have a quick answer here. I actually wrote a paper on this. I don't think there's going to be a single space ethics. There's not a single Earth ethics. The ethics of India and the United States, the ethical systems are different. If you said how many different ethical systems exist on Earth, I don't know how many there are, but there's a lot. And so I believe that if you're living on Mars, you're going to look at what's right and what's wrong differently from people living on the moon. I think we can see some of the outlines of it, which is that people are going to really have to depend on one another. And there may be more of a collective awareness of that survival imperative. Yeah, so it's really a big topic. I'm so glad that Arobi is looking at it. And I think it'll take her the rest of her career to figure it out.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you so much for your work and for raising a question. I'm also happy to connect with anyone who wants to dive deeper into the topic as a passion of mine, definitely. And yeah, thank you everyone for your time today. If you want to get in touch also with MoonDAO, the people who enabled Eiman on his journey, and you want to learn more about this type of organization, feel free to reach out to them, right? I believe some of them, like Ryan, is also here today in the call. If you want to get in touch with us, feel free to sign up our wait list that I linked in the chat. We want to do more of those kind of events. We're also building a DAO for seeing us as an interconnected species, part of life that goes to space based on a mindset that does really connect us all. I hope to see you next time as well. Have a great week.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you, Isabel. You're doing great work.